solve some of the problems that everyone in attendance knows exists in this county, in this state, and in this country. But there are lots of choices of things we could do. And I want to tell you, a lot of them work really well. And it's kind of like the choice that we have if you feel like having a hamburger. You got a lot of choices. You can go lots of different places. You can go some old places, some favorite things that you've known for 30 years, or some newer places. When IHOP said they were going to become IHOB, did you hear that little talk? I don't know. The International House of Burgers instead of the International House of Pancakes? I don't know. Anyway, but all of these burgers have the same ingredients. And that's what a lot of the programs that you will hear talked about and discussed. People develop their favorite of different programs, but the basic understanding that all of them now have incorporated is this notion of brain development and what is the impact of toxic stress on brain development, on the circuits in the brain, on the ability of the brain to learn new information and ever be able to retrieve that information. And those are sort of two different problems, but within the brain there are circuits that we will talk about. So I'm going to give you about this much of brain science before we get too much further. But I want to talk about stress. All of us are stressed. We have deadlines. We have not enough money to cover what we know is coming in the future. Lots of reasons to be stressed. But that is actually a positive. It is a motivator. When you feel a little stressed about something, you end up doing an action plan. You say, all right, this is what I need to do to avoid that. I gave this example the other day in a conference. A few months ago, I missed an airplane trip. I had not given myself enough time to get through the TSA. So that was a little bit of stress. I had to reschedule. I had to call all the people at the other end and say, I'm really sorry, blah, 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 blah. But it was a motivator because what I said in my brain was, I'm never doing that again. So haven't you many, many times said to yourself, whatever it is, you say, I'm never doing that again. So it allows you to make plans and to do things better and to do things differently in the future. That's positive stress. Tolerable stress for children, an example is a 4-year-old whose grandmother dies. Now she gets very stressed because she sees the adults around her crying and she doesn't really understand what's going on. She has no idea what death really is, but it must be something scary and fearful. But she gets through it because she has relationships with other caring adults who help her to mitigate whatever those feelings of panic and distress are in her body and in her brain. Toxic stress is if that 4-year-old little girl lives solely with her grandmother, and that's her only caregiver. She has nobody else besides her grandmother. If now that grandmother dies, it creates in her the kind of stress that this little group here, we were talking about young children in this county coming to preschools, coming into our communities really stressed because they don't know who's going to be taking care of them. They don't know who's going to pick them up at the end of the day. They don't know whether they're going to eat. Those kinds of problems over time, repeated, is what we're talking about with toxic stress. So I think that's important to make the distinction between the stress that we felt coming here this morning and getting up early enough and on a cold, rainy morning to get here. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about brain-changing doses, repeated doses of stress. So here's some of the programs. You may have a favorite. Some of you are familiar with some of these kinds of programs, Nurturing Parenting, Triple P, down in here, Nurse-Family Partnerships. All of these work, all of them. Nurturing Parenting, for example, it's been around for 40 years. Stephen Bavelek, an amazing guy. It was his doctoral dissertation that he then grew into this whole program that not only goes nationally but worldwide. Same thing for down in Australia, Matt Sanders, 40 years. It was also his doctoral dissertation. So be careful if you're going to go into a doctoral program, and you may be in it for the rest of your life. These guys have been at it for a very long time. This is Dr. Bruce Perry. I'm going to talk just about this much about him in a couple slides later. And the reason why I wanted you to know about him is because our governor, Governor Ducey, and his wife Angela have brought Dr. Bruce Perry's programs into Arizona, and you're going to start to hear a lot about it. When you have the governor behind you, you've got a lot of push and a lot of power to make things happen. And we now have the opportunity to have his Neuro Sequential model, and I'm going to explain that a little bit to you. Neuro, the sequential part of it is actually pretty easy, and I'm going to explain to you how the brain develops in a specific sequence. Your brain, my brain, the brains of your children, your grandkids, all of our brains, though unique, developed in the identical sequence. So this man's programs, Dr. Perry's programs, talk about how we can take an understanding of a simple sequence and layer on it behaviors and things that have happened to children and try to figure out how to heal the brain, and it works. He got a lot of notoriety on the 60 Minutes. Well, if you've made it to Oprah, you've made it. You know, she has that power to expand our universe with all kinds of new ideas, and this neurosequential model is one of them. She has made a statement, I haven't tracked it, I don't have a way to track it, but she has said that all of her philanthropy from this point forward, dealing with education, is going to be devoted to the brain and what Dr. Perry is bringing into our country. So this tells us not only is it a nice thing to do to protect a child's brain and to provide them with the things that they need, but it is really a great investment. James Heckman won a Nobel Prize for figuring this out. So starting with early childhood, I'm not sure that you can actually see it there, but starting with early childhood, Head Start, public education, juvenile justice, mental health, criminal justice, and substance abuse. But look where the best opportunity to get it right, to get the brain, to get the circuits going well for a lifetime occur when we had no idea. Before neuroimaging, before brain imaging, we suspected that little children learned a lot really quickly, but we had no idea the degree to which the brain forms in these earliest years and that those patterns sustain throughout a lifetime. So we are figuring out what's actually going on in the human brain with a number of different technologies. This is the easiest, simplest one. It's just a simple EEG. This little cutie pie here sitting long enough to get all those electrodes onto the cap. I don't know, she was a better behaved child than I ever had, I don't know. But I wanted to make sure that as excited as I am about early brain development, there's actually a second opportunity to get it right, and that, believe it or not, is in the teenage years. The teen brain goes through massive reorganization and growth in particularly what they call the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes are right here behind your forehead, and that part of the brain is what we consider adult functioning. It doesn't fully finish. Somebody call out, when do you know that the brain is really finished developing? Age? 25. I love that because long before brain scans, guess who knew that the brain finished at 25? Car rental companies. Car rental companies, I mean, years ago, 30 years ago, they were like, until you're 25, you're not renting my car. So, why is that? It's because these frontal lobes are responsible for judgment, for prioritizing information, for making good decisions, for knowing how to plan and execute something, for impulse control. That's a big one. We know that children throughout the growing up years have a problem with impulse control. And they actually should, because they don't have enough neural tissue yet in their brains to completely manage their desires and their wants. So they, if somebody wants a water bottle that's sitting over here, it's real fancy, it's kind of pink and it's got a bunch of flowers on it, and I'm 4 years old, I just take it. Because I don't have much impulse control. My brain is not ready yet to monitor my behavior. So we do it for them. The adults monitor the children's behaviors. So a very brief look at the brain. The handout that I gave you on the first page talks about the parts. When we first started looking at the brain and figuring out what each part did, that was kind of cool and interesting to know that in the back of the brain is where vision is, but up front in the brain, that's what I was just talking about, having more adult thinking capacities. But as interesting as it is, it's sort of just knowing the parts doesn't really help us to figure out what to do if a kid is in trouble. So if you turn your page, go to the next page. The inside of the brain really tells a better picture and helps us to know what is going right, what's going wrong, how we might intervene to help a child. And that's because of the inside of the brain. I'm going to show you the two structures that matter the most in the topics that we're talking about. So one is called the amygdala, and you have two of them, one in each hemisphere. And the second is the hippocampus, also one in each hemisphere. The amygdala is really important. It helps to keep you alive. It alerts you to something that's dangerous. So in order to stay alive, your brain is constantly sort of monitoring the environment to say, what bad thing could happen to me? And we are, over the eons of our own human development, we've become really good at making sure that we're safe. That is, if you're an adult and you're in control of yourself. If you're a little kid, who has to keep you safe? The adults. And when the adults don't keep you safe, the amygdala gets overactivated, and so they're monitoring the environment all the time. They are hypervigilant, hyperactive, and that's actually very adaptive. When I was a 5th grade teacher, I used to wonder why kids would just fly off the handle. I was telling about back in the day, we would line kids up to go into the lunchroom or line them up to go to recess. And I could always predict, there's going to be a lot of fighting in that line because somebody bumps a kid, and all they were doing was turning around. But the kid standing here hauls off and smacks the guy. And you're like, what's going on? Well, that kid's response to immediately respond with aggression keeps him alive in his house. Because guess what? If he doesn't fight really, really hard in his neighborhood where there's drive-by shootings and there's knifings and there's, you got to be a good fighter, right? So what has been at times in a person's life adaptive in order to survive becomes very maladaptive as we try to assimilate into a society. So fight, flight, or freeze, and it's on all the time, even when you're asleep. That's why the smoke alarm in your home will alert you instantly, and it's your amygdala that picks it up first. So the hippocampus is the part of the brain that both stores memory and then ever is able to retrieve it again. And notice that they are almost literally connected inside your head. So it means that things that are emotionally important to you, you store to a greater extent, and things that aren't so important, you don't. So as a 5th grade teacher, I would wonder a lot of things. That's why I went back to school. I got my PhD actually in learning, because I wanted to figure out how it was that a kid that I knew was smart and that I would work with, and I knew that he understood the concept or she understood the concept, but the day of the test, nothing. What I didn't know then, and I know now for sure, is that anxiety and fear block the hippocampus's ability to find the information that's actually in your memory. So these things about the brain that we are finally learning explain a lot of problems that children have in school, and it really describes a lot of problems that we have with their behaviors. So this is the new way to look at the brain. It's called diffusion tensor imaging. And so, as I said, it's kind of cool to know what the parts do, but what's really cool is to see how they are integrated to finally be able to understand what a thought is. By the way, I don't know one scientist who could actually give you a really clear understanding of that question. So what is a thought? We don't know that yet. It's kind of cool. So the brain develops, I'm going to go back here a second, from the back of the brain to the front. It also develops from the inside of the brain growing out and from the bottom up. So way in the back, way down low, and in the center, coming all the way up and over, all in service to trying to get the thinking, reasoning, rational part of our brain to work really well. The cool thing about this new technology is look at how many circuits are going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in the brain. The input from the back of the brain, what you see and what you hear and what you feel, all coming to thinking about it, and then going back again and reflecting, and then coming back and thinking again, and going back and forth. The reason why I'm showing you these is to know that it's in the very center part of the brain, in that diagram that I showed you, where the amygdala and the hippocampus are, in the very center. So the emotional processing part of the brain, dead center here. So almost any time that a child or you and I as adults start thinking about something, we got to pass right through the emotional part of our brain. What do we feel about it? Are we like this? We're not. Do we get distracted easily because we're nervous? And does the thought then get somehow stopped? The center part of the brain and the lower parts of the brain are what is causing a lot of the troubles that we see in children as they age, and all of us as we age. So you've seen this, kind of a display before. This is what we see. These are the behaviors that we see from adults in the criminal justice system or in the juvenile justice system. We see it every day. What we don't see is what caused it. So the science now is trying to go deep into the brain, into the amygdala area, into the very center, and into the brain stem to find out, number one, why it's dysfunctioning and what we can do about it. So today we're here to talk about what we can do about it. But I wanted to make sure that you understood that it's not the behavior itself. It is what has happened to a child prior to that moment in time when they broke into a house and stole a bunch of stuff. What is that about? Why are they doing that? You're going to hear Dominic in a few minutes talk about ACEs. I'm going to give you just the briefest overview of it. This is a very complex slide. Basically, to show that the growth of a human being is rooted in all kinds of things that really matter. Does someone have a home? Are they living in their car? If you're living in your car and you're 3 years old, your life is a lot different than the kid who is snuggled tightly in their, Spider-Man bed with all their little toys around them. That's a big difference, and it matters. So all these things at the bottom are what Dominic is going to talk about. What is the impact of poverty, of not having enough to eat, not having good housing? And how does that manifest later on into mental illness, physical and emotional neglect, divorce, and substance abuse? And again, Dominic's going to take this deeper for you, but basically there's sort of two different kinds of dysfunction, things that happen to us every day in our lives. And the ACEs study that was done in the mid-90s, where Kaiser Permanente, a health insurance organization in California, and then the Center for Disease Control got together to start to look at data. Data is really important, to collect information that then we can examine and decide if what might be causing what. And so there is a 10-question questionnaire that I think is on your table. Dominic, is it on the table? Okay. So you can look at that later. It's kind of interesting to take this test yourself. It's a questionnaire, it's not a test, it's a questionnaire. And if you have a score of 0 for once in your life, that's a good score to have. 0 is great. 10 is not so great. And the distribution in between, and Dominic will be telling you he's not a 0, I'm not a 0. A lot of us in this room are not zeros. So what does that mean? It means that you may have had recurrent physical abuse. If spanking and beatings were in your home, maybe historically, your parents, that's how they were disciplined, and that's how their parents were disciplined. Physical abuse has an impact on the brain. So does recurrent emotional abuse, downing a kid, telling them all the time that they're worthless, that they're, nothing. Sexual abuse, emotional neglect and physical neglect. When you're really poor, a lot of times there's a lot of neglect. There simply isn't enough food to go around. There aren't enough supervising adults, loving adults to go around, leading to neglect. On the other side here, household dysfunction. Was anyone in your home when you were growing up an alcoholic or a drug user? Was anyone incarcerated? Was someone chronically depressed, suicidal, or mentally ill? Was the mother being treated violently, and or, by the way, the father? And was there a single parent household, or maybe no parents? So these are the kinds of things that contribute to changes in the brain that then some of the behavior, the top part of the iceberg that we see are really, we're beginning to understand, are coping mechanisms to deal with the pain and the hurt of things that have happened to us in our lives. Adolescence, boy, we begin to see this really strongly. You actually see it in preschool, you see it in elementary schools, and definitely in high school, where all kinds of physical behaviors that you see kids do are really coping mechanisms. And when you really boil it down and you really begin to address the underlying issues, some of these things are more curable. So this is a complex slide, so let's take this a little bit at a time. About a third of the population in this country reports no ACEs. Those are lucky, lucky people. 51% report 1 to 3 ACEs, and 16% have 4 or more. And what they have found is that the likelihood of these various behaviors increases with the dose. It's called a dose response. And so over here with 0 ACEs, let's just look at alcoholism. If you have a 0, your chances of becoming, the likelihood of becoming an alcoholic, 1 in 69. But if you go all the way over to 4 or more ACEs, it's 1 in 6. That is a huge difference. Come down here to IV drug use. 1 in 480. If you have 1 to 3, it drastically changes already down to 1 to 43, and over here 1 to 30. Heart disease. Here's the thing, I've been doing this for a long time. Before I learned about ACEs, I knew that Jenny's brain, that had been very damaged, that I really needed to do a lot to protect it. I had no idea that things that happen to young children could in any way be related to cancer. How is that possible? What is that link? What the link is that the brain changes that also occur in the immune system. To lessen the immune system, so we have an increase in diabetes, we have an increase in heart disease, cancer, all kinds of things. Suddenly, this gets the attention of us as adults. It's like, wow, if my ACEs score is X or Y, maybe I need to stop eating the potato chips I'm eating. Really, I need to take better care of myself. I need to, each of us as individuals, when you take and get your ACEs score, by the way, the 10 things that are on that ACEs test aren't the only things that impact our lives. Those were just the 10 things that have been studied over and over and over again. The initial test was done with 17,000 adults, 70% of whom were white, 70% of whom were college educated. So the original ACEs study was done on a very sort of high functioning group, as we would determine them in our society. So Dominic's going to talk about this more. How am I doing time-wise? So coming back again with this slide about the return on investment. An investment in early childhood, $1 invested, yields anywhere between, all of the estimates, between $7 and $16. So when we as a society don't have very many dollars to go around, it's a really good investment to invest in early childhood, to invest in the training of early childhood staff members, to invest in the training and education of parents. Anyone dealing with young children, you can see that this return on investment can be tremendous. So, there's a lot of words up here. The switch, they're talking about switching the lens. It doesn't require each of us to change dramatically to be able to start to become trauma-informed. And in my own personal life, it does work. Instead of always thinking what is wrong with a person, now first really wondering, I wonder what's happened to that person. I wonder what kind of a life they've had. I wonder what kind of a morning they've had. Road rage, doesn't necessarily mean that you were abused as a child. You could have a really bad moment and, lash out at somebody. So what has happened to this person? This is my biggest message. Risk is not destiny. We get all tied up, I think, in all of this research and what does it say and isn't it terrible and what are we going to do about it? But each person in this room, every single one of us knows somebody or a lot of somebodies who had a rough childhood and turned out pretty good. Risk is not destiny. When they told me Jenny would never talk, you have no idea how verbal this kid is. If she were here, she'd be, nabbing you and saying, do you have any kids? Well, where are they? How old are they? Do you have any dogs? very sophisticated use of language. And sometimes when she's really, now she rages a lot. I want to be able to tell you that. Her triggers, man, she goes from 0 to 100 in a second. And when she does that, and I'm trying to control her behaviors, and sometimes I'm driving, and I'll pull over to the side of the road because I don't want to discipline this kid in the state that I'm in. I need to get calm myself. But on the way, I'm like, Jenny Stamp, what is your problem? Now, she doesn't use any parts of her body. She can't stand. She has no use of her legs. She has no use of her right hand. She has left hand use only. But with that left hand in her mouth, this is Jenny. I don't know, Mommy. I think I'm having an anxiety attack. I'm like, okay. I didn't know she knew that word. She was about 12 when she pulled that little number. I'm like, are you kidding me? Risk is not destiny. And it's because of neuroplasticity. Thank goodness, you and I can continue to learn and learn and learn and learn throughout our entire lifespan. We can change. Our brains can change. Our children's brains can change. They can get better. Things can improve. I tell the story about it's never too late. I told this story the other day. My mom is 102. She is in perfect health. She takes no medicine, unlike me. She takes no medicine, and she learned how to use the computer when she was about 80, and she now has a blog. How crazy is that? I don't have a blog, but my 102-year-old mother has one. She came out here for Mother's Day, and the last time she came out, I was a little concerned because my brother, who lives near her in Cleveland, Ohio, usually takes her to the airport. She flies all over the place. But he was out of town, and I said, Mom, maybe you shouldn't come. Rob isn't available for you. And she said, are you kidding? I'll just take an Uber. I'm like, okay. Yeah. How are we doing time-wise? What? Oh, good. All right. So I wanted to show you. I've tried to simplify the brain for you, but it is extremely complex. A little, drawing like this begins to elaborate that. But this very complex model can be simplified, and this is Dr. Perry's work, where he really looks at the brain's development in this sequence from the back to the front, the inside out, and the bottom up. And onto that, he maps, I'm going to go ahead here a second. I'll show you the map first, and then we'll come back. This is called brain mapping. And this does not require expensive brain scans for a child. This is an example of one. An age-typical kid, age 11 to 13, see all the green areas? That means that child's brain, from brain stem going up and out, is developing perfectly normally for all of the ages and stages. It still has more to go up here in the frontal lobes, but here's a child about the same age, and the red areas mean severe dysfunction. So without a scan, so you say, well, how do you develop this map if you aren't going to scan their brains? You take a really good, thorough history of what has happened to the child and at what age. So for my Jenny, the age was prenatal. And so I know that down low, where this one has the 7s, you see the 3 yellow 7s and the 1 green 11, my Jenny's would be red all the way up the whole brainstem because she had 2 surgeries when she was in the NICU with no anesthetic. That was the state of the art at the time. And when I heard that they were going to do these surgeries, I'm like, with no anesthetic. I mean, I had the same reaction that you just had, like, what? And the doctors assured me, oh, well, she won't ever remember it. Well, cognitively, up in here, she doesn't remember it, but her brainstem knows that bad things can happen to you in a second that you had no idea was coming. And that's why she's so hypervigilant. That's why it's so hard to calm her down. The kids that you work with, you know that kids, when you see a kid and that you know that they just went from 0 to 100, that is a part of their brain that is in panic mode. That is a part of their brain that is completely out of control. They are in fear. It goes from alarm, being a little like, uh-oh, what's going on, to fear of something bad, really something bad's going to happen. I'm going to run, I'm going to do this, up until terror. Terror, when a person's brain, at any age, a kid or you and I, when we are terrorized, we have almost no access to our frontal lobes. We can't make decisions. We don't know what's happening. We lose all sense of time. By the way, when you are in terror, there is no such thing as knowing what time it is or how much time has elapsed. That's in a different part of your brain. So, I'm going to go back here just a second. So here's Dr. Perry's model. Again, brainstem going up, he calls it the diencephalon. It's just really where the brainstem starts to come into your skull, into the brain area. And then this neocortex is all of the stuff that we typically think of as a brain, the folded parts of around the brain. You can see it goes all the way from body temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, ability to sleep, all the way up through arousal, sexual activity, attachment, affiliation, and at the very top, abstract and concrete thought. So if you and I, and for the majority of my life, I thought I could talk people in or out of something. Well, you can if they are also up there in their neocortex and able to think and feel and respond and reflect and do all of those kinds of things, great. But if they're down lower in the brain, talking does absolutely nothing because they actually don't hear you. So when you think about kids who are involved in criminal activity or severe aggression, and we're just going to sit down and give them a little lecture, it doesn't do anything. I'll share another small little Jenny story. I want to be a patriotic American, so when she was really little, I wanted to take her to show her the 4th of July fireworks. What a great thing that was going to be. And on the way there, I'm describing to her, because by now I knew that verbally she was listening and that she was comprehending. And I was describing to her the beautiful colors that we were going to see in the sky and how amazing it was going to be until the first kaboom. Wow. I really lost her. And now I'm trying to tell her, oh, honey, that's nowhere near here. It's over there. You know, these guys, they know what they're doing. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. And then the second one goes off, and the third one goes off. Well, I had to just scoop her up and get her out of there. Year 2. It takes a while for me to learn. I'm coming back at it. You know, we're going to go, we're going to be good people. Thank you. We're going to be good people, and we're going to go and celebrate our country. And same thing happened. By year 3, the mere mention of going to fireworks would set her off, and she's screaming at the top of her lungs. So by year 4, the rest of the family goes to fireworks, and Jenny and I go shopping. You know, it's just, you just have to make those accommodations for what's really going on with somebody. It wasn't worth putting her through any part of that anxiety and distress. So this is Dr. Perry's model, and that's what he's working with now. So he maps the likelihood that the disruptions in brain development are impacting the behavior of a child in very expected ways. So again, take a thorough history, find out what age the child was. Did the disruption happen when the child was 2 and the grandma died and there was nobody to take care of the child, and so she went into foster care, and then she went to a second foster home, and then to a third and a 9th foster home? You track what has happened to a child and then go back in time and try to supplement the experiences that the child is having that they missed. So that sounds kind of odd until you actually do it with a child. My best friend adopted a 5-year-old from Russia who was he'd been in an orphanage. I mean, all of the things that you may have heard on the news about how disrupting that can be to a child's development. And so the family just thought they would treat him like a normal 5-year-old, and so they enrolled him in school, and they enrolled him in T-ball, and he got kicked out of absolutely everything for aggressive behavior and an inability to adapt. So finally, the family came to me and to my daughter, the little neuroscientist, and said, do you have any suggestions? And we said, you need to parent him at the age at which he is behaving. And they said, well, he's acting like a 2-year-old. I said, What I want you to do is hold him a lot. I want you to sing to him. I want you to read to him. I want you to get in bed with him and hold him tight and read stories. And I want you to do it every day. Not someday. I want you to do it every day, multiple times a day. The brain learns through repetition, 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 repetition. So as a 12-year-old, now this kid didn't want any of his buddies to know that, but his dad still, every day, lays in bed with this kid, and now instead of reading storybooks, they read hot rod magazines together. But it still goes on. This kid now is 21 years old. He works for Lexus. He's a computer engineer person. He earns way more money than I do. And so treating the child, giving them what they missed, is at the very core of what is going to be happening here in Arizona. So I need to show you this. This is the neurosequential model, the neurosequential model of therapy, this neurosequential model of caregiving. So there's lots of people around the state being trained in this model. They're starting in January 28th, this neurosequential model of education started. There will be thousands of school teachers and preschool teachers who are going to be trained in this model to help to understand that you interact with the child at the age at which they are behaving and start the therapy and the repair at that time. Does that make sense? It's hard to grasp, but there are lots of things that are being done. Governor Ducey's wife, Angela, described her family situation. It's actually her sister who adopted a 9-year-old, again, a 5 or 6-year-old, and his ACEs score, and she told us, so I feel free to pass it on, that no one told her when she adopted this child that the kid's ACEs score was a 9. They discovered it pretty quick. It disrupted the entire Ducey family, cousins and aunts and uncles and everybody. And Angela Ducey and her sister started going around this country because a lot of things are going on in the country. And that's why I'm so proud of all of you here. I think to hit this on directly takes courage. It really takes a lot of communication between and among all of you. It's good stuff. It's good stuff to hit it now and to start to do something. So what's going on nationally and even internationally and locally? Mayor Mitchell in Tempe, about 2 years ago actually, decided that Tempe was going to become the most trauma-informed city in America. and with a bold statement like that. He actually has hired a couple of people who go around. I see the firefighters back here. Every first responder has been trained thoroughly in ACEs and in trauma-informed responses. How could you behave the same or differently depending upon what the situation is? So all firefighters, all the police department, all of the city employees, all high school teachers. It was actually the high school teachers who asked to get this training, because guess what? The suicide rate in Tempe high schools is the highest it has ever been. And the teachers are going crazy. They're like, what is going on? This is not okay. So that's sort of local here. Wisconsin has decided that they're going to become the most trauma-informed state in the United States. And on my feed, I get lots of stuff on ACEs every single day in my email. And I love this one because I'm Scottish. And so Scotland has decided that they're going to be the most trauma-informed country in the world. So there's a good competition. It's a healthy competition. And you guys are ahead of the game here. I don't know of any other county who has decided they're going to be trauma-informed and actually do something. So the do something is coming up here in about 5 minutes. I wanted to show you, this is a real client at Arizona's Children Association. This is the child at 13 years, 9 months, and you can see a lot of red and pink. And this is that same child at 14 years and 4 months. Actual brain changes. The circuits in the brain are now going in different directions, and they are not automatically triggering to the same things that the brain used to trigger to. I'll repeat it again. It's never too late. This was a 13-year-old. Can you imagine the kinds of progress that we can make if we start with 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds or parent education so that this never happens? I'm going to conclude with this. The advice of Dr. Perry is to never start with trying to reason with someone, but to start to, first of all, regulate yourself. It's not easy if there's a kid who's in front of you who's kicking you and biting you and telling you to stay calm. That's hard. To recognize that this work is really, really hard, but to know intellectually that it's possible if I calm myself down, I can begin to calm my child down, and then through relationships can finally get to the point where we're reasoning. And it may be that for a specific child, it takes a really long time before you start reasoning with them. You're bouncing back and forth between regulating and relating, and regulating and relating, regulating and relating. So I want to leave you with this thought. Very hard to do, but something that is a goal for all of us and our teachers and our firefighters and our police and our city workers, all of us, to keep ourselves calm and regulate, and then go about the difficult task of trying to regulate our children. Thank you. Thank you. By the way, the other hand